So, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. My name is Samantha Rigby. I'm Wellbeing Relationships Manager at New Leaf Health, and a woman in perimenopause myself. No problem admitting that. So I'm really pleased about today's panel discussion and some of the information we're going to be imparting. Certainly, when we put this out there to our clients, there was lots of interest and lots of questions, which we'll be covering today. Thank you for your input there. So we'll be looking at menopause and particularly mental health in relation to that, as it is Mental Health Awareness Week. Many of the symptoms around menopause sort of present themselves behaviourally, as I'm sure you're aware, and the need for sort of education and awareness around that in a workplace is vital, really. 1 in 3 women is going through this in your workplace, my workplace, everywhere. So getting them the help they need and making that transition as comfortable as possible for everyone involved is in all interests. And just for a bit of context as well, I know some of the questions we had revolved around the new Employment Rights Bill and the legislation that's going to be coming in next spring around a menopause action plan that employees will be required to supply if they have more than 250 employees. So we're going to touch on that a little bit later on as well. It's a tricky one, that, and no mean feat for employers when a lot of the information around menopause is unreliable. So I'm joined today by experts, I'm sure they won't mind me saying, in this field, who are going to start unraveling this and giving you some practical information and help to help you in your workplace and indeed personally as well for some of you. So allow me to introduce the expert panel. As said, Vanessa Walker joins us. That's Vanessa in the black jumper. Vanessa has multiple qualifications around menopause awareness and confidence, not least from the Association of British Pharmaceutical Industries. She's also trained under renowned menopause expert Dr Louise Newson, who some of you may have heard that name before. Vanessa is a very successful and highly sought after consultant around menopause, and she works both with clients on a one-to-one basis and within organisations. So a real wealth of information for us today. She's got a very vibrant website, a social media presence. I hope she won't mind me sharing. And I think that's really kind of sparked and certainly captured attention of women going through this and the people supporting them, and arming them with facts, not fiction, as you put it, which I really like that. So thanks for joining us today, Vanessa. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for that, Samantha.
You're very welcome. And also joining us in the lighter colour jumper is Claire Bennett. Claire is a workplace mental health and inclusion consultant. She's over 25 years experience delivering training, coaching, facilitation around various topics, not least mental health, and is very passionate, much like New Leaf, in creating healthier, happier workplaces where we can all thrive. So Claire delivers mental health and suicide intervention training across different countries and cultures. And the organisation she works with, I'm sure will all join me in singing Claire's praises in that regard. She's excellent at delivering that kind of training to make an inclusive environment. So in what's been a very busy Mental Health Awareness Month so far, we're really pleased Claire can spare some time to join us. So thank you, Claire, and welcome.
Thank you, Sam.
Before we begin, I'm going to tempt the perils of technology with our new lovely platform, and we're going to do a poll. So on your screen in a moment, you should hopefully see a poll pop up, which is going to ask you about what brought you here today. What was it about the marketing for this session that led you to feel you wanted to attend? So when the poll pops up, you'll be able to click on screen and select response. Okay, so the results are in. I'm just going to have a look at those. And actually, unsurprisingly, actually, I think personal interest or experience came up as the most popular reason for attending. And I think that's male or female. I think that's really interesting, isn't it? You know, that, like I said, there's a lot of misinformation. So getting to the root of what's true is really helpful. Closely followed by supporting employees in my organisation, which is super. Thank you, and the main reason we're here. And developing the HR or wellbeing strategies and policies around menopause as well, or all of the above featured. So so thank you for that. So as we move through the session today, actually, please do think about any specific questions you might have, because we'll come to those at the end. There isn't a chat feature that runs throughout the whole session, but we will open up the Q&A at the end of the session for our panel. So you'll see their individual realms of speciality, and you do feel free to pop any questions in there. So moving straight into it, Vanessa, as our menopause specialist, I'm going to come to you first. There were understandably a lot of questions around what menopause is, what it isn't, the difference between perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause. Can you talk us through that in layman's terms and kind of take some of the myth around it?
Of course. Essentially, all menopause is that we've run out of eggs in our ovaries. So they literally switch off the production of estrogen and progesterone. And the clinical definition is a cessation of periods after 12 months. So technically, menopause is 1 day where everything switches off. So if you've had no periods for 12 months, your ovaries have switched off, you can be classed as menopausal. Now, technically, postmenopausal means after that 1 day. But the problem I have with that term is that it suggests that menopause is a phase, that there is an end to it, that you merely just go through menopause and then you're out the other side. Unfortunately, once menopausal, always menopausal. So I try not to use the words postmenopausal, because I think it's a little confusing for some. Perimenopause is where our ovaries realize they're getting low on the stock of eggs, and they tell the brain, we're getting low on stock, we're going to need to start thinking about shutting up the shop. That is literally all it means. But the brain doesn't like change, it likes equilibrium. So it tries to produce more hormones to stimulate the ovaries to release more eggs. And this is where we get that hormonal fluctuation and roller coaster, which is what we class as perimenopause. So that's essentially what it is. So perimenopause is the run up to our ovaries switching off. Menopause is the day or 24 hours where our ovaries have switched off. And postmenopause is once those two things have happened. So I hope that clarifies.
Very much so. That's really helpful. Thank you. I think the term perimenopause is often misunderstood, isn't it? A lot of people refer to it for the whole range of menopause as a term, if you like. And as I say, misunderstood and sometimes trivialized. We'll come on to some of the symptoms later, but I'm going to run a little poll here as well, just before we move on, and we'll revisit the results a bit later on. But this poll is going to ask about, have the attendees here today ever witnessed menopause symptoms being dismissed or trivialized at work because of this misunderstanding, this, oh, it's just, you know, their time of life. So yeah, that poll's going to pop up on your screen in a moment. And again, pop your vote in there and we'll revisit that in a little while. We're also going to look today at menopause from a physical perspective to understand the impact on mental health. Sorry, forgive me, I've lost my place. Yes, so we're going to come back to the poll to give you some time to respond, because obviously it's spur of the moment. Vanessa, another question came in around male menopause or andropause.
Yeah.
Certainly we cover that in some of our sessions. Is it real? Does it have implications for the workplace, was a question.
Yes and yes. So andropause, unlike perimenopause and menopause, is a gradual slow decline of the production of testosterone. So similar to women, we gradually lose our testosterone over a long period of time. And that's a very slow, gradual decline. And it's the same in men. From approximately about the age of 30, 35 in men, there is a gradual, slow reduction and production of testosterone. Now, very similar symptoms actually can be suffered with, very similar to women, especially cognitively. A lack of focus, a lack of cognitive clarity, muscular aches and pains, all the symptoms that women would present with a testosterone deficiency, because we produce testosterone as well in our ovaries and our adrenal glands and several other organs in the body. So they can experience very similar symptoms, but because it is a slow and gradual decline, a lot of men don't notice it, but a lot of men do. So this is classically called midlife crisis in men, usually, where perhaps they go and buy a very expensive sports car. This is the stereotype. Or they start dating a younger woman. Yes. But they tend to experience very, very similar experiences to us, especially cognitively and emotionally, especially with a lack of sexual desire or potentially a lack of erections and involving that sort of area. But yes, it is real. And a lot of men really do suffer. So it's not just us women that go through it at midlife, it's men as well.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. I was aware of the link between hormones and mental health, but when you talk about some of those physical symptoms that manifest, yeah, clearly it is very real, as much for men as for women. Thank you for that, really helpful, and I hope the gentlemen in the audience have appreciated that, and the women who have gentlemen in their lives. Just to bring in our neurodiversity expert here as well. So Claire also has some knowledge around neurodiversity and inclusion. The relationship between menopause and other conditions, such as neurodivergent conditions, Claire, that was a question about how can that manifest, and how can we recognise that?
It's a challenge, right? And actually, I think so. Neurodiverse, anyone that has a neurodiverse brain, okay, you're born with that brain, unless you have an injury of the brain or a neurological illness, which it can occur later on in life. But for the vast majority of neurodiverse brains, you're born like that. Okay, but what you can see is when some of those hormone changes happen, at whatever stage it happens for you in your life, then actually some of the symptoms of neurodiversity can be exacerbated by the change in the hormone. So actually, and actually it's something that Nessa and I have spoken about previously, is you might see there's an influx of later diagnosis in neurodiversity in females, for example, because actually perimenopausal, menopausal symptoms have exacerbated or really brought some of those symptoms to the forefront, and therefore people have gone and got a diagnosis potentially. So you've seen that kind of surge in later diagnosis, because you know when you think about a neurodiverse brain, it's where it is jarring against societal norms a lot of the time, right? And there are behaviour challenges around that, or it could be educational challenges around that, with things like dyslexia, etc. And so it's going to have an effect on us from an emotional perspective. Well, again, that is going to exacerbate it even more so when you're also coupling that with your hormone changes. So it's all kind of like a big amalgamation of all of it happening at once, right? And that surge at that particular time in life, whichever time in life it hits you, because as Nessa will tell you, that can be at different times for different people.
So Nessa, actually, please come in at that point. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Well, what a lot of people don't realise is that our 3 hormones, and yes, we do have 3, and that's estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone is just as important. They all work as neurotransmitters in the brain. So they are all essential for cognitive, memory, emotional function. So what happens is when we start to lose our production of those hormones, because they're produced in the brain, just like they're produced in the ovaries, when those levels start to fluctuate, our brain cannot function as it is used to. And they are also involved in the production of other neurotransmitters.
Okay, that's interesting. Oh, as Rebecca froze, Vanessa froze. Are you with us, Vanessa? Okay, well,
we lost her.
I think she may have frozen. We're actually just going to review the details of the poll that we asked about having witnessed menopause symptoms being dismissed or trivialized. Actually, this is really quite heartening. So 33% said occasionally, which is encouraging. Only 22% have witnessed this happen regularly, which is still too much, but it's better. And rarely was only 14%. Again, that's still too high, isn't it? We shouldn't see it at all, but it does come from this misunderstanding and this lack of information that's reliable around perimenopause particularly, but symptoms and how they manifest themselves. Hopefully Vanessa will be able to come back and join us at some point. I've got my colleague who's going to try and rouse her and see that she can get back on. This next section, actually, we're going to turn the spotlight a little bit more specifically to mental health. So I'm going to come to you, Claire. I know we spoke about the transmitters, the neurotransmitters, and certainly they affect behavior and how we present. But what are some of the most common mental health impacts of menopause? Was a question.
Yeah. So again, it depends on the person, right, as to what that might look like. Because I know in some of the questions that we had through, some people were actually talked about depression quite a lot, and the correlation between depression and menopause. Well, it's because sometimes some of the emotions that hormone change kind of starts in us, can be associated with some of those mental health conditions, such as low mood, such as lack of energy, such as not really getting the joy out of some of the activities that we would ordinarily love to get involved in. We're not getting that same connection to it, which are some of the classic symptoms or some of the most common symptoms of depression. So it kind of makes sense that there is that correlation there. I think sometimes when it comes to maybe going to see a healthcare professional about that, and I've spoken to lots of women on a lot of my courses around mental health, where they've said, you know, I went to talk about perimenopausal or menopausal symptoms, and I was told I had depression, and I didn't think I had depression, and it's that kind of conversation. And I think, sometimes when you're in those situations, sometimes it is more about the trial and error part of it, because some of those symptoms do mimic one another. Now, the cause could of course be menopause or perimenopause, and that imbalance in those hormones, the changes in the hormones, is the root cause as to why you're experiencing those symptoms. So maybe trying HRT or whatever that might be could be the thing that helps to manage that. But there might be some people who say, well, actually the HRT didn't work for me and I still had those symptoms, therefore you might then look more at a depression. It's challenging for a healthcare professional. It's also very challenging for the individual. I think sometimes some people you just need to keep talking to your healthcare professional. Know yourself. If you've got other symptoms that are associated with perimenopause or menopause and menopause that sit outside of the realms of depression, then educate yourself about that before you go and see a doctor about it, because you might talk about fatigue, you might talk about low mood, but if that's coupled with sleep interruptions and maybe weight change and maybe hot flushes or skin irritation, sore gums, there's loads of different things that might be a challenge. If you're also experiencing those things, make sure that you bring those up in your conversations with a healthcare professional. It's really important that you're able to kind of advocate yourself, but you need the information to be able to do it. So education about what it is, I think, is really important. Now, I've just talked about depression, but I also have to talk about anxiety. As someone who is also going through perimenopause at the moment, for me, my anxiety levels are much higher than they've ever been before. And that's definitely something that I've noticed and a symptom for me. And I have coupled that again with lots of other things that wouldn't be associated with one of the anxiety disorders, but could be associated with perimenopause. So I always think, one of the questions was, how do you advocate for yourself when you might be told by a GP you've got depression or you've got an anxiety disorder, and you're thinking, I just don't think that's right. Make sure you have all of the information, and there is a vast amount of information out there. Make sure you go to the right places though, and I'll let Nessa be the one to tell you about where's the best place to go. But having that information, preparing yourself to go into those conversations, I think is really important. I also think this is where the workplace can really help their workforce, because if you have awareness training, if you have access to that type of information for your employees, it equips them to be able to manage that situation for themselves far better.
Yeah, exactly. And I completely echo. It's that identifying where your symptoms sit. Is it perimenopause? Is it more of a mental health condition, which is a very different scenario? And yeah, I'm sure as a healthcare professional, there's pathways, but it must be challenging. Absolutely. The other kind of big one, I suppose, and I think Vanessa touched on it a little bit earlier, looks like she's still having technical problems, bless her, is the dreaded brain fog. And I think we've all experienced those times where you just can't get the right word, or I get it daily, multiple times a day, where you just can't focus, you just can't think, and your cognitive function is severely declined, and you can panic because you think it's something more serious, can't you? Absolutely. And I personally can relate to that. It's one of my biggest symptom of perimenopause that I'm going through. I know the words, I can describe what I'm trying to tell you, but I cannot get that word out, or I'm in the middle. And of course, what I do, I speak at events, I speak at conferences, I deliver training, I'm in front of people, and I might be in the middle of saying what I'm saying now, and all of a sudden my brain goes, what are you trying to say? Do you know what you're saying? And then all of a sudden I'm like, I haven't got a clue what I'm talking about. And then I get myself all kind of wound up about it. And that affects my ability in my job, right? And that's something that I think
we need to not underestimate the impact that has then on mental health, right? Because you question yourself, you think, what should I be doing, what I'm doing? And you know, and actually I'm 45, I'm actually at the peak of my career, I'm doing really, really well, but some of these symptoms are challenging that. And that is why, I mean, personally, I actually have an appointment next Friday to go and see my GP about it, because I believe that I've been going through this for about 3 years now, and I think that I would like to discuss options of treatment, right? So having to advocate for myself, but the brain fog is really concerning. And if that is a symptom of yours that's really causing you issues, it can be very, very challenging, because it affects your mental health as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, certainly talking to colleagues and friends, it knocks, and we'll come on to self-esteem and confidence as well, but it begins to make you question, can you do your job, as you say, and you lose confidence in doing some of the things that you're perfectly able to do. Vanessa, welcome back. No, that's absolutely fine. Nice to have you back. We're just talking about dreaded brain fog. You referred to cognitive decline earlier, and the impact that has. What's your thoughts around it, and does it improve actually? Does it get better?
The problem with perimenopause and menopause is a very individual problem. We all experience it in a completely different way. So some of it, sorry, I'm reverb now, so I'm trying to cause we all experience it very differently. Some women can get used to the new equilibrium very easily, and it takes time, and their brain gets used to the change. A lot of women, however, don't. And the most common things that perimenopausal and menopausal women experience, and Claire and I had a conversation about this the other day, was walking into a room and forgetting why you've gone in there. Now, this happens at work, it happens at home. You can be in the middle of doing something really, really important, and you think, oh, I need to do this. I'll go next door and do, and then you go into that room and you've completely forgotten why you've gone in there. The other one is forgetting common words for things. And this can be a real issue at work. So you know it's parked outside in the car park. You know you're going to go and pick up your kids later on this afternoon, but you cannot for the life of you remember what it's called. Now, cognitive issues like that, for some women, they can gradually get over it over time. Perimenopause can last anywhere between 2, 7 and 10 years, and in extreme cases, 15. Some of us get used to that new status quo. Unfortunately, the vast majority of us don't. And this is where our memories start to forget things. And unfortunately, there are scans of perimenopausal brains and menopausal brains where it shows you the activity of the brain. So pre-perimenopause, perimenopause and menopause. And it actually shows us that quite a lot of areas of the brain stop working as efficiently and there's less activity. And that's because without those neurotransmitters, we can't have proper cognitive function. So unfortunately, as well, conditions like Alzheimer's and dementia, they tend to start occurring about 20 years before symptoms start showing up. And there's a big study going on at the moment by Dr Louise Newson that's looking into this and to why this happens, because the vast majority of cases are in women. And it's twice as many women as men over the age of 50 start suffering with dementia. And they want to find out why. Before the age of 50, it's twice as many men. And it's all to do with this hormonal change that happens during perimenopause and menopause. They think has a huge amount to do with it. But some women don't have an effect at all. But unfortunately, a lot of us do. And it's all, a lot of it is down to hormonal withdrawal, but also lack of sleep. Sleep is a big, big influencer on how we can cope with our symptoms. What's actually found is those of us, and I was one of them, who suffer with a severe lack of sleep during perimenopause and menopause tend to have worse symptoms as they go through, because a lack of sleep, it's very difficult to cope with anything in life, let alone hormonal symptoms and hormonal withdrawal symptoms. But those of us who have better sleep, who seem to keep our sleep more regularly, find that they have a better cognitive function and can bounce back from symptoms that are more severe. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it really does. And the sleep thing, I can see Claire nodding away there, and I'm sure there's many people listening that will echo that as well. It's having done a couple of sleep workshops, that it's so important, isn't it, for so many things. But when you're suffering with this hormone imbalance anyway, and then a lack of sleep on top, it's just compounded, isn't it? It doesn't make it any better at all. We're going to run another little poll here around mental health symptoms. My trusty assistant in the background is going to do the whizzy technical bit, and this is going to talk about what symptoms do you feel least equipped to support your employees with, or yourself? What, you know, are the symptoms that you experience that you don't feel you get support with? So it's kind of a double-ended question, really. So that poll will be up on screen. I'll revisit it in a second. And just touching on that again, and I know we spoke about the effect at work it has when you have some of these symptoms. It's also about the relationships as well, isn't it? Personal relationships at home, and the relationships within a team at work, or superiors or people that report to you. How can we support people in those situations? You know, any words of wisdom on that one, Vanessa?
One of the most common symptoms is actually anxiety. And I've experienced this, and I can see Claire kind of nodding her head as well. And it comes from a lack mainly of one particular hormone, which is progesterone. And progesterone drops first. And a lot of women will say, I don't feel like myself. They can't quite put their finger on what's wrong, but they don't feel like themselves. And social anxiety is a major one. And I used to be the life and soul of the party, wanted to speak to everybody, was very active, both at work and at home, wanted to socialise. And then all of a sudden, it was like somebody had flicked a switch. Didn't want to speak to anybody, didn't want to talk to anybody about what I was experiencing. I became very, very closed off, didn't want to leave the house, wasn't interested in doing anything at all. And I think it's very, very difficult to open up communication when somebody is actually going through that. So it's giving a space and the time for people to talk and to say what they're experiencing. So if somebody goes from being the life and soul of the party, or being very articulate and having a lot of involvement in their workplace, as well as their physical work, to not taking part in things, not conversing with people, taking themselves out of the equation, I think opening up a conversation with them and actually saying, is everything okay? And just being aware of how people are behaving, that will actually help a huge amount, is being acknowledged. Because the other issue is a lot of people aren't listened to, whether that's in the workplace or by their doctor or by their family and friends. It's having that open-ended trust that somebody is actually going to believe what you're telling them, because a lot of people don't. Women aren't listened to. So I think it's being open to listening to what women are saying and giving them an opportunity to talk in the first place, and just being aware if somebody's behaviour changes. Would you agree with that, Claire?
I think what's really important in workplaces is equipping people with the skills to have those conversations.
Yes.
Because it doesn't come natural to everybody, and it's not fair to assume that everybody has the confidence. There are very common concerns. What if I say something wrong? What if I break the law? What if I break some kind of employment law? I shouldn't be asking these things. It's none of my business. You know, I shouldn't. What if I say something wrong, or I make the situation worse? All of those are genuine concerns, okay? But they are things that we can overcome, because actually all of the evidence suggests that opening up a safe, with a framework, with safety, not asking anyone to be a therapist, counsellor, diagnose anybody. We're not asking anyone to do any of those things. We're just asking someone with a bit of confidence to sit in empathy with someone and say, you don't seem like yourself. Is there anything that you want to talk about? You don't have to solve the problem. You don't have to do it. What you need to do is listen, hear what the person is saying, offer up some options. Have you discussed it with anybody? How do you feel about that? What does maybe using an employee assistance program look like for you? Have you ever considered speaking to a doctor? What about your friends and family? Have you spoken to them about how you're feeling? It's just posing some of those things and then helping them access it when they're ready. Yeah, and that, I think, has a massive impact in a workplace. No one is asking anyone to diagnose anything in a business. Yeah, and I think that's, we need to be really conscious. And you are not breaking the law by asking somebody how they're doing. You can't do any damage with that. In fact, you can only do good. So that's what I would say there.
Yeah, that's actually, I think, one of the key messages. I think a lot of the questions that we received and comments were around sort of reasonable adjustments and that avenue of what can I say, what can't I say, what's appropriate, and how much should I do and can I do, which is going to help, but still be within the realms of my organisation's policies, which we will come on to. I'm going to put a pin in that one because that's a really important point. But I don't want to go off quite on that tangent before we finish this conversation. Just going back to sort of practical solutions then. So we've talked about those relationships and how we can help with opening up and talking. Another question, and I'm going to come to you, Vanessa, on this one. What role can nutrition, vitamins and supplements play in supporting mental health during perimenopause and menopause?
This is a little bit of a controversial one because a lot of the information that's online isn't monitored and isn't regulated. So there's a lot of dangerous information out there. I think the best way of me answering that question is we need to look at things like perimenopause and menopause with a 360-degree approach. So it's not just about replacing hormones, if that is what somebody wants to do. It's about the right nutrition and it's about the right exercise. Now, personally, yes, there are supplementations that I would recommend for women in certain situations, but it's very individualistic. So the best thing to do, I personally, if you want good advice on supplementation, is to go down the nutritionalist route and actually see a professional. And I have several people that I refer to because it is not my speciality. When it comes to the impact of hormonal loss on the female body and the pharmaceuticals that are available to help support that, I'm your woman. When it comes to nutrition, not quite so much, but it is very dependent on the individual. So we need to look at our exercise. That probably needs to change to what we were doing in our early 30s, late 30s. We need to look at our actual nutrition, what we're eating, and not just pick up a supplement. Are we eating healthily and nutritionally? Are we actually feeding our body? Or a lot of women, unfortunately, starve their bodies and don't actually eat enough for our bodies to be able to function, as well as, is hormonal supplementation something we should be looking at? So I'm not really going to answer the specifics about what supplements should be used because it really is dependent on the particular individual concerned. So, yeah.
No, thank you. I think that's really important. It's as you say, there's an awful lot of products out there now that claim to be the cure-all for everything, and it's not regulated at all, is it? No, and when you're desperate and you feel unhappy and you know you need some help, you'll try everything and can spend a lot of money.
I have tried all of them, I promise you that.
And unfortunately, the trend with companies, especially with food nutrition at the moment, is to stamp menopause on the front. And a lot of these products have got no basis in actually helping menopausal women at all. So if you are unsure, go and speak to a specialist.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great advice, actually. Thank you. Yeah, really, really helpful, that. And I can't stress that enough. This isn't necessarily something you're going to solve yourself. So seeking specialist help is certainly an avenue you should consider. I'm very conscious of time, and we've still got quite a lot to get through. So I'm going to move on now to workplace culture, what workplaces can do to help their employees feel safe that are going through menopause, and what they can put in place on a practical level to help those people. So Claire, I'm going to come to you first, and feel free to bring in, I know we spoke a little bit about legislation, but do feel free to bring that in as well if that's relevant.
Yeah. Do you know what the thing is that's probably most of you here probably don't want to hear is one size does not fit all. Sorry. Which you know, for workplaces you can go, oh no, because that might overcomplicate it. However, you can uncomplicate it by looking at inclusion as a whole, right? Because a lot of what we're talking about in terms of some of those symptoms that women might be experiencing, and then you look at neurodiversity, you look at mental health challenges, you look at someone going through physical illness or physical disability, you look at all of those things, and actually if you look at inclusion as a whole, one thing could be something that is helpful to all of those particular groups, right? So one thing that you look at is maybe a quiet space to work. So if you work in a big open plan office that can be busy and really loud, there are some times when, you know, someone is maybe overstimulated, maybe you've not slept particularly well, you know, some of those perimenopausal or menopausal symptoms have really disrupted that. Maybe you're feeling more anxious, you're finding it difficult to concentrate, and actually being in that environment is really difficult. Having a pod or a quiet room where you can go and focus and get those things done is really, really beneficial. But that's also really beneficial for somebody with ADHD or somebody with autism, or someone who wants to focus on something and just needs that quiet space, right? So you have got one thing that you could do in your organization that actually creates an inclusive environment for multiple groups, right? So when you think about, oh, we've got to have this for menopause, and we've got to have that for neurodiversity, we've got to have that for physical disability, unpick all of that. You're looking at inclusion as one whole thing. And when it comes to some of the legislation, it is good to know about the legislation, right? Because it protects your organization, it informs you, it gives you some good practice and guidance. But it's all very grey a lot of the time. And I know that we've got, you know, the guidance that's in place now, and then that's looking, you know, to spring next year, that's going to be law. But even when you look at it, it doesn't just cover menopause, because it also covers the gender pay gap. You have 18 points of an action plan, but the law is going to state you only need 2 of those action plans. One has to relate to gender pay gap, one has to relate to menopause. And it has to be a new thing, or something that you have ongoing at the moment, in progress. It can't be something that's already embedded. It has to be something new to demonstrate that you're putting in new things for those particular areas. But actually right now, what does it look like for an organization? Well, so it does, you know, whilst it doesn't say menopause is a protected characteristic, menopause can be categorized under some of those. So sex, it could come under; age, it could come under; disability, it could come under. Okay, and there have been tribunals that have come under those under the Equality Act. Okay, so even now there are things that you need to think about. I would also relate it to the Health and Safety at Work Act, which states that you need to look after the welfare and well-being of your staff. So your work environment, your working practices need to mitigate risk that could mean that you cause harm in well-being or welfare. Well, menopause would come under that too, right? So there are already legislations in it that, while they might not specifically say menopause, it can come under that. I think in an organisation, the most important thing that you can do is a risk assessment to start off with. Where are the risks in my organisation? Because it depends on your industry, it depends on, you know, the type of organisation you have. I know legally, you know, the number's 250 plus in terms of that, but I think all organisations need to be looking at all of this, because some of that legislation, Health and Safety at Work Act, it's 5 employees and more, right? So you do have to look at all of those different elements and just think about, yes, it's great to have that menopause action plan, or have, you know, things that you're going to do around menopause, but think about it more broadly. And there are a number of initiatives that already exist out there, and it's just about looking at how that is going to work in your organisation. So, for example, if you have a board and there is a lack of female representation in that board, and maybe lack of anyone going through the menopause in that board, then you can look at things like allyship. Right. So, for example, my husband is a menopause ally in his organisation. He has had additional training so that when he is in a room of decision makers and there isn't the diversity around that table, and they haven't got somebody who could represent someone going through menopause or perimenopause, he's been given that extra layer of education so that he can be an ally for that group. Right. So, and that again works across all inclusion. Allyship is a really great thing that you can do. You can also then think about networks, employee engagement groups. You know, how can you create those environments, inform? There's no point in HR team who do not have the representation of all the different groups in terms of inclusion, sitting in a room trying to come up with a strategy or come up with policy. You need it needs to be informed by those groups, the people that live it every day, that understand it. So I think it's really important that you check in with all of those groups, that you're going down the right route. And then other things that you can think about, inclusion passports, because this is quite an individual thing. Somewhat like, so for example, one of the myths, everyone has hot flushes. No, they don't. Right. So you know, I've got a very good colleague of mine who is going through perimenopause, similar to me, but we can sit in a meeting for 2 hours, and within that meeting she's had 5 hot flushes. And I mean, literally, she's just like, I've got to walk, I've got to get out of the room. You know, because she gets very flustered by it. I don't experience that. Right, that mine is very, very different. Mine, brain fog is my biggest one, and levels of anxiety are difficult for me. Whereas one of her bigger ones is that. Right, so you don't need to worry about air conditioning for me. I'm all right. I don't need to worry about that. But what I do need is for you to help me manage my cognitive load. Right, so for a trainer, that's quite specific to me now. But let me just talk about what I might do. I have to train. I'm not saying to an organisation, well, you can't make me train anymore, because that's my job, right? So I can't say I'm not going to do that. But what I do is I ensure that I have it in a schedule that's going to work for me. If I have training every day, okay, then what I'm going to do is make sure that's a mix of online and face-to-face, because for me, face-to-face is far more draining than online. Online, I get proper breaks. I can move myself away. I can take a proper respite. When you're delivering face-to-face, especially with the topics that I do, I get lots of engagement from learners for the whole day. Sometimes I listen to a lot of people's personal challenges, etc., because of the topics I cover, which is very understandable. And actually, I enjoy doing it, but it does take a lot out of me from a cognitive perspective. So I have to have a balance of face-to-face and online. So that's just a really reasonable adjustment that I do to help me manage some of those challenges. So businesses just need to, I would have that in my inclusion passport. right now, where I'm at, I need a balance. I'm not saying I'm not going to do my job. I just need the balance to be able to do it in a way that allows me to manage the symptoms. That's what a reasonable adjustment is. It's not telling me I can't do the job. It's just telling me that I need to just change the way that I'm doing it so that you still get what you need, business, but I also get what I need to keep myself well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it really does. Thank you. Vanessa, let's hear from you on reasonable adjustments. I'm sure you can add to that no end.
I think, and as Claire so rightly said, it is very individualistic, and the hot flush thing is the most common one. People assume, oh, I haven't got perimenopause, I can't be in that stage of life because I don't have a hot flush. I think flexible working, Claire kind of touched on it there, really is a big thing. So it doesn't matter what your symptoms are and whether you're able to actually go and see your GP and have time off for going and see your doctor, having flexible working. So some women's brains go from being more alert and really awake and scheduling everything in the morning to suddenly not being able to function first thing in the morning because they haven't slept well. And it takes them that bit longer to really be mentally astute. So perhaps scheduling more things in the afternoon will help. So flexible working mainly. But I'm just going to go back to what Claire said earlier. Rest and relax little quiet areas where you can take yourself away and go and do your work separately and not be overindulged with a massive open plan, really loud office. Because some of us have symptoms. There are 98 confirmed symptoms now. So it is exceptionally diverse. One of them is tinnitus. Yes. Some women can have such bad tinnitus and such bad ringing in the ears that it's exceptionally difficult for them to concentrate. Some other women would have the reverse issues, Claire. They have extremely dry eyes. And it's so bad that glaring at a screen for hours on end, doing online training and working online all day is really, really difficult because they have to go and use eye drops every other minute. So having face-to-face sessions, if you're a trainer, in that incident, is actually beneficial. So it is about the flexibility of how you deliver what you need to deliver in your job. And being aware that everybody suffers and experiences this stage of life differently. So being able to be inclusive of that, but those little quiet areas to go and work for the vast majority of perimenopausal women will be very advantageous. So I think that's quite a big one.
Yeah, I think I'm sure many people would agree with that. And as Claire said, not necessarily just for menopause. There's lots of instances, isn't there, where that would be deemed a reasonable adjustment that's relatively easy to do as well for most workplaces. So yeah, thank you. Really helpful. I think we've actually covered off the majority of the questions that came through just through natural conversation, but a couple did come through on the Q&A chat, and again I think some of these have been covered off, but yeah, I think when you opened it up, Vanessa, and said about the length of time symptoms of menopause remain, I've certainly felt a bit crestfallen, and somebody's actually put, so post-menopause emotional highs and lows will always remain.
Not necessarily, because once we reach menopause, when our ovarian function stops and we stop producing estrogen and progesterone, that extreme roller coaster of hormonal fluctuations stops. Now, for some women, we get used to that new status quo, or lower hormonal levels, and after a while, our brain and our body can actually get used to that new status quo, and we find that actually cognitively and physically we're okay and we can cope on a day-to-day basis. A lot of women don't, though. So instead of that hormonal fluctuation, they do suffer with hormonal withdrawal. consistently, and that is what needs to be understood. And I'm just going to add a little addendum on here, not to be a bit of a on a downer, but what we need to be aware of, especially as women and in the workplace as well, is that our hormonal shifts during peri and menopause and the symptoms that we can experience, whilst they can be horrific, and for some women they are, what's more important is that we need to be aware that as a result of losing our hormones, we are at higher risk of future inflammatory diseases and autoimmune conditions. So I want to bring that up here, not to put it down on the end of the session, but it is something we need to be aware of, is that we are more at risk once we have lost our anti-inflammatory hormones. So being aware of the options that are available to us, whether it be exercise, nutrition, like we were talking about earlier, but particularly with hormones, that's really important. But everybody's an individual. So no, it sounds really depressing, but for a lot of women, you know, we've been going through this for a while, but in evolutionary terms, we've only really been living this long for the last few, you know, in the average age of menopause in the 1900s was 51. And the average age of menopause in this country is still 51. But the average age of death in the 1900s was 51. So we've only really been living past that fairly recently in evolutionary terms.
As life expectancy has increased, I suppose.
Has got longer.
Yeah.
So it's learning how to make the most of our lives after that. And that can be a very positive thing, actually. But we've just got to be aware of that. I hope you don't mind me bringing that up as a subject.
Not at all. I think it's yet another reason to listen to our bodies and not necessarily dismiss symptoms in perimenopause, because they can manifest and go on to be other things that are much more serious, can't they? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I'm just going to touch on some of the other questions that came through. As I say, I think we have covered some of these already. One of the things that came up, and I think we did touch on it, and I'm not sure which of you is more comfortable sort of answering this, is how would you know if a symptom is perimenopause or dementia?
Do you mind me starting this off, Claire? Okay, it is very difficult. And personally, when I am on a one-to-one session with a lady, it takes quite a long time to ascertain. But essentially, if a woman has suffered with clinical depression before perimenopause, so we're talking before mid-30s approximately. It's different for all women. Some women it's earlier, some women it's later. If a woman has suffered with ADHD, bipolar disorder, clinical depression, some sort of neurodiversity, autism beforehand, then it's liable to get worse when this stage of life hits, as Claire mentioned earlier. If it is a new onset of anxiety, depression, low mood, feeling very crying all the time is one of them, feeling like you want to cry for no particular reason. If it is a new onset, it's more likely down to be hormonally caused. Some women, for example, some women who have severe PMS or PMDD, who experience significant emotional changes through their cycle, will also find that perimenopause and menopause is more difficult. But basically what you need to think about is a new onset. Were they diagnosed with clinical depression before their early to mid-30s? Were they diagnosed with ADHD before then? And as Claire said, a lot of women get diagnosed with ADHD and autism actually when they hit perimenopausal age, because it's almost like those hormones are masking the condition until they disappear. So again, it's very individualistic, but were they diagnosed with it before? If they were, it's likely to get more severe. If they weren't, it's probably just the hormonal fluctuations. Claire, have you got anything to add to that?
No, no, because I'm not a clinical expert in that particular area, but I absolutely agree. I just think that, you know, you have to think about what's happened before, where you're at now, and understand that actually, like I know somebody's asked about PMDD, and it can for some people just exacerbate some of the symptoms that they may have previously already had.
Yeah, and I know it wasn't necessarily something that we said would be an outcome from this, but based on that guidance, which is going to become law next year, any pointers around how an organisation can draw up a menopause action plan? Claire, I'm going to come to you first, and then Vanessa, have a think about what you'd like to add.
Okay, yes, so the guidance, and so you can get lots of guidance on the government website, by the way, around the new legislation that's going to come in for springtime next year. It's guidance at the moment. I would definitely, especially if you're a larger organisation over 250, be looking at starting to implement those kind of things now. Guidance is always to start with like a risk assessment. Where are you now in terms of your organisation? Where are your pinch points? What kind of things do you need to consider within your industry, within your setting of work? Some people are fully remote, some people are in an office. It depends on those different situations, right? So you need to have a look at and assess your organisation first. That can then lead you into the action plan. And again, there is guidance. They have steps, the 18 different steps for you to consider. You can go and have a look at what those are on the government website. And then you need to have two. One needs to be gender pay gap, one needs to be menopause, and that's the minimum. I would say you're probably going to end up with more when you've done that risk assessment.
Thank you. Vanessa, anything to add?
Yeah, the only thing I would add extra to that is the voluntary standards came up on the questions before we started today's session, and actually the BSI has some recommended standards across menstruation, mental health and menopause, and they have a guideline that actually is free to download. So if you go onto their website, and actually that's probably the most up to date as far as menopause is concerned. A lot of the standards and the guidelines, unfortunately, the government one is very good, as Claire said, but the BSI do have some free resources available online that might be worth a look before implementing either a risk assessment or anything else. ACAS also has one as well. For menopause, which is actually quite accurate and up to date. So both of those I would recommend having a look at, and that might just help put a menopause action plan together.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful, and unfortunately I think we could probably be here for another hour, couldn't we? We have come to the end of our allotted time. Thank you so much, Claire, Vanessa, for your time this afternoon. Clearly both very knowledgeable and passionate ladies on this subject. I really appreciate your input. To the attendees, I know we had a few people drop off time-wise, but thank you for your participation as well. Just a final poll before we go. If anyone would like to just vote, what's your biggest takeaway from today on the poll that you'll see on the screen in a moment? Be really useful to know what you're sort of taking away from the session, and hopefully we've covered off most of the points that you had in your questions. I know there's been some specific ones which we'll attempt to come back to. If you've got any specific requirements around your workplace, this is for the attendees now, do get in touch, because both Claire and Vanessa have a range of services that we can help you to access that will help with what your objectives are around menopause in the workplace and mental health in the workplace as well. So please do reach out, and if we can help, we're more than happy to do so. I'm just going to look at that poll now about the takeaways, and it would be really great to know what the biggest one is. A better personal understanding. Isn't that super? I think that's that mission accomplished right there. Thank you for that, very much so. And wanting to introduce or improve a menopause action plan, which hopefully we've given you some guidance on that. When we send out the recording, I'll get Ben, our marketing manager, to pop in those references that we made to some of the templates that you can download free of charge as well, that will help with that. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of Tuesday, and a great mental health awareness week. Do something that makes you feel good today. Thank you very much.